The ADA takes millions of dollars from insulin manufacturers to make sure that people like you and I have no idea about this secret insulin, because chronic disease is all linked together through that lab. Insulin, a fasting insulin levels go up 7 to 10 years before glucose levels start rising. Why aren't we catching it then? It's a $10 test, because I think there's so much writing on the confusion of measuring insulin.
Hi, Kyle. Welcome to the show.
Hey, glad to be here. This is fun.
Welcome to Peak Performance Perspective, where we help entrepreneurs master health, wealth, and relationships. Now, as a diabetes prevention lifestyle coach, what does peak performance mean to you?
Man, that is such a loaded question. And I'm glad that you asked me that, because peak performance for me was like a personal quest. But the personal quest had to be like, how could I improve my paddleboarding? At what is the right nutrition? What is the right training schedule? What does it take to be? And this comes by re-identifying myself. And I said, okay, I'm a diabetes coach, as well as I'm a paddleboard recreational athlete. So peak performance to me is, how can I get the best time on the water, my best performance? But I think it comes from knowing. And I'm anxious to talk to you about, what does it mean to be a peak performer that knows how to perform? When will we have our best outcomes? When will we have our best performance? And there's numbers and data that drives that knowledge for me. And that's always been this quest. How can I improve my performance? But what is it that I can measure versus this kind of this voodoo science? I feel like a lot of us, especially me, have been hindered by genetic material. Our own DNA kind of hinders like what we can do based on our phenotype. Like, what design are you? What is your ideal sport based on your genetics? Are you heavy on the type 1 or type 2 muscle fibers, right? Slow twitch or fast twitch? What are you designed for? Like, my wife is a very type 2. She can build muscle like crazy. Type 1, not so much. That's me. So we're distance runners. We're not so much sprinters. So like, I spent a lot of time going, okay, what works best for me? I did distance running for a long time. And so stand-up paddleboarding for me was an easy transition. It's the same mindset. It's that, how fast can I go between this landmark and this landmark, right? What's my speed? What's my endurance? What's my capability here? How can I train with the right movements to improve? When stand-up paddleboarding, a lot of it is type 1, slow twitch muscle fibers. So you're doing a lot of this. It's metabolic, or so shall I say, mitochondrial efficiency. So how efficient are your mitochondria in their ability to burn fat for energy? That's my peak performance. Is, if I'm going to be doing 7 hours on a paddleboard, my nutrition better be spot on, because I can't be going in the middle of, say, Lake Tahoe, this is a 22-mile race. You go from South Lake Tahoe to North Lake Tahoe. It's a 4.5-hour grind. It's hell. And you're in the middle of the lake, and you better not hit a wall, because if you don't have enough of the fuel, but more importantly, if you have properly trained, you can burn mostly fat even at very high intensities. So for you athletes out there, what is your RQ? What is your respiratory quotient? What is your VO2 max? Because for me, the 50-50 split between glucose and fat burning occurs at 85%. I'm just dipping in, and majority of my energy would be coming from carbohydrates, over 85%. How often in an endurance race are you going over 85%? So how much carbohydrates, how much fueling do you need during the race, and what is it for? That has been a lifelong question for me. Like, what's the best nutrition trained athlete? Can you be a fat adapted athlete so that even at high intensities for long periods of time does not require a lot of glucose fueling? Because my muscles are really good at being forced to burn fat for energy. And what I've discovered, I don't want to be a glucose burner. I want to be a fat burner. There is a lot of negative things that can happen if you're constantly fueling glucose, carbohydrates, right? If you're trying to burn carbohydrates as your major fuel source, you're not going to be able to burn fat very well. The enzymes and the efficiency and the machinery to run and burn fat for your primary energy is going to diminish because you don't use it. If you don't use it, you lose it. But if you're a primary glucose burner, you have to be that constant glucose burner. And Professor Tim Noakes out of South Africa has shown that a lot of these athletes get into trouble and about a third of them become pre-diabetic. You're pushing your glucose as your primary fuel. But what people don't understand is, I think biochemistry wise, we were designed to burn fat. We could save our brain. Alzheimer's disease will not be a problem if you're a fat burner. If you're dependent upon carbohydrates for energy and you make that brain carb dependent, it's not going to be able to burn fat. You're going to starve it. That's type 3 diabetes, but that's a side note here. If you can efficiently burn fat for energy, your respiratory quotient will be high. You'll be very efficient at burning fat to the point of when he did these tests. You got to start doing some of this math. It is crazy. At incredibly very high intensity, like sprinting, these fat adapted athletes are still burning almost completely fat. Very little carbohydrates do they dip into. That carb tank is so tiny. Just start thinking about it. Huge bodybuilder, maybe 300 to 400 grams of carbs that he can store. How much is that? It's not even a pound. Okay, it's less than 1 pound. And how many pounds do we have of fat? Plenty. Even if you're a 200-pound beast, right? And you have 10% body fat, you are lean and you look great. You still got 20 pounds of fat, 70,000 calories. That's a heck of a lot of energy. That's what I'm saying. Doesn't this make more sense that the carbs that we store really aren't necessarily for that muscle, but maybe the muscle has the ability to store carbohydrates to protect the rest of the body from hyperglycemia. When we exercise, we improve our ability to absorb glucose into these massive storage tanks. Okay, these are the big storage tanks. The liver is small. The liver can only store about 100. The rest of the body, 250, 300, maybe. And how big you are. But you think about it, it's not your primary energy source. You would rip through that so quickly. You want to preserve the glucose that's stored in your muscle. You want to preserve it when you're going into that super high intensity. So if you have to tap into those glucose stores early and you're at 50% intensity, which you find a lot of people that eat a lot of carbohydrates, they are crossing over to majority carb burners at a lower intensity, 50 to 65%. So they are very, you can run this engine on super high octane and get really great speeds, but you are pounding glucose all day long. You are a glucose burner. That's high octane fuel, but you wouldn't be able to do it for too long. You'd have to be doing goos all the time, right? I can't stand that. I cannot stand seeing that stuff all over the place. You go to races and stuff, it's everywhere. Keep your garbage. But to me, it just says you're not fueled properly. There's a huge industry on this fueling, these energy drinks, and they're just boluses of glucose. I don't think they're that healthy. What Noakes found is that when you are dosing glucose during an endurance event, that you really only need 10 to 25 grams per hour. That is not a lot of glucose. That's not even one goo, right? What is a goo? 25, I think. And or feeding, you're dripping that glucose into your water supply and staying hydrated. But yeah, I've geeked out a lot on this. Professor Tim Noakes is the direction I would take people in. I think they even there's a low carb peak performance book as well, written by Finney and Volek. And it's all about these fat adapted endurance athletes. And that has been I've had my radar and my lens just focus on their understanding of what peak performance is. And that really, it's amazing. You don't lose sprint time. You don't lose explosivity. You don't lose that high end. The sprint time are the same. So I know we've focused so much. Matter of fact, Professor Tim Noakes was the one that wrote the book, The Lore of Running. He also wrote the chapter on carb loading. And he has since then ripped it up, thrown it out, and says, my apologies, I was wrong. I got this wrong. We don't need to carb load. Okay. We just need to be really good at burning fats as our primary fuel source, not our alternative. So dipping into the carbs as a last resort is really what we want to do. You don't want to hit a wall. If you ever hit a wall, it just feels horrible. I mean, I've done this where you're racing and you're running and you're like, oh my gosh, my first mile time was crazy. I'm like, this is too fast. I got to slow down. But sure enough, by the time I got near the end of that 10K, I just couldn't go any further. I've had the same thing happen to me out on the water. It's, oh man, it's not something you want to experience. It's awful. You feel like you can't go anymore. But can I complete the loop on this? Because it's fun. So endurance athletes, you guys need to measure. You need to know when you're getting in trouble. You need to know when you're dehydrated and when you may need to dose. And I think the best way to know this is using sensor data, using things like a glucose meter, continuous glucose meter, an HRV, a heart rate, and you'll know that there are signs of fatigue in the middle of an event. Obviously afterwards, but during an event, you can see signs that you're running into trouble. And I think that there's a safer way to do these events, And I'm working on a really cool AI program that can help these athletes train better, smarter, not harder, and not get injured. Because I don't want anyone to burn out. I don't want anyone to get fatigued, injured, and have to switch over to stand-up paddleboarding, which is a really low injury sport.
Wow. So before you became an unscripted pharmacist, you were working in traditional healthcare. What was
Mhm.
the moment you realized that the traditional healthcare system was failing people?
Yeah, this has been a major struggle because so I started doing diabetes education in 2014. So I started helping people with diabetes and I'm following the ADA guidelines because I've got those memorized and that's what they tell you to follow. And that's what the diabetes medications. I started doing these diabetes education courses. Everybody with diabetes gets an 8-hour course. And really, it's just a scare course. It's to scare the death out of you about all these complications of diabetes. And I'm like, oh man, complications, like the nerve complications. And you talk about amputation and blindness. It's, oh, okay. There is a ray of hope. But I did not realize that the directions that I was following was conflicted. Like the American Diabetes Association that makes these dietary guidelines has their hands in industry. So when Sarah Hallberg did this very famous TED talk, when she was like, ignore the ADA guidelines, ignore the guideline panels. Okay. These committees are conflicted. I dug deep. So I started looking at these people that are making these recommendations. I don't know how many were in that group, but there was $750,000 from Big Pharma given to scientists, especially the chief and editor, money going to them from Big Pharma, especially the manufacturers of insulin. And this is where I started getting a little uptight because here you have type 2 diabetes is a condition of hyperinsulinemia. That's type 2. Let's be honest. That's 95% of people with diabetes. Okay. Forget about the type 1. They don't have enough. You got to give it. But the type 2s have too much insulin. So why would we give more? That's the recommendation. If your A1C is 9 and your blood sugar just happens to be like close to 300, we just put you on insulin. But you're in a state of high insulin anyways. So why, if you gave more, you're going to make the condition worse. And literally what we're seeing in this world in which we live is the condition and the effects of hyperinsulinemia. And nobody talks about that. I was told that insulin comes in a vial and it lowers glucose. That's it. Pretty easy to memorize. Pretty simple. Not that hard. What is insulin? Well, you use it when patient's blood sugar is above 9. Type 1s use it all the time. And in type 2, anybody that has an A1C above 9, this is what we do. And we never think about it. We never bother to ask ourselves, what is the condition of the patient before we start that insulin, before we start those diabetes medications? We never get a fasting insulin level. We got a glucose, but that's if you're focused on glucose as being the disease and the problem. Certainly it is. It's the side effect. But what about the insulin part? That's the bigger part. Because I'm telling you, if you fix this, the insulin part, glucose goes away. That's never a problem. We already talked about how to fix that. Movement helps insulin work, lowers glucose right away. But when your insulin level's elevated all the time, because we're constantly eating carbohydrates, we're eating sugar, we're eating things that damage our mitochondria that then make our bodies insulin resistant. Fat cells become insulin resistant. Liver, muscle, they all become insulin resistant. Insulin doesn't work. The cells are resistant. And what do we do in type 2 diabetes? We just give more insulin. The ADA takes millions of dollars from insulin manufacturers to make sure that people like you and I have no idea about this secret insulin, because chronic disease is all linked together through that lab. Insulin, a fasting insulin levels go up 7 to 10 years before glucose levels start rising. Why aren't we catching it then? It's a $10 test, because I think there's so much writing on the confusion of measuring insulin.
So, do you think that the average doctor is misinformed or are they trapped in the system?
Oh, the same as me, misinformed. The schooling, the education, we never talk about insulin. Insulin comes in a vial. It lowers glucose. Nothing else. It is like the master hormone when it comes to anabolism and fueling your human body. It's when your insulin level is elevated, you're burning glucose. When insulin levels are down, you're burning fat. You want to burn fat? Get your insulin levels down. But we got to measure. Why aren't we measuring? It is something that's never covered in biochemistry. It's something that's never covered in pharmacy school. Like it, same thing with physicians. And you got to start thinking about what would it be like to be a physician, hearing everybody talk about the ketogenic diet and lowering their insulin level. They're going to be out of job. Somebody just watched a YouTube video that is more relevant and pertinent to their disease of diabetes than anything he learned in school. That feels awful. You feel duped. And feeling duped is an awful position. You spent a lot of money on your education. You wrapped your entire career around that certificate, that license. And I got more out of my biochemistry, my undergrad, than I ever got out of pharmacy. Pharmacy school, it was memorization. It's memorization of charts. How well did you have good photographic memory? Like it's just which of these ACE inhibitors works the best in this population? That's all it is. Okay. And talking about side effects, they don't tell you about the more important side effects. So here I am as a retail pharmacist, and I know for a fact that cardiovascular disease is related to inflammation, not this cholesterol stuff. You want to focus on LDL, but that is not the problem. The problem is the two other parameters that you're missing. I, for example, am borderline high LDL because of family history and whatnot. I'm not supposed to be on a statin, but if I had hypertension, I should be. If I'm very close, as far as my BMI is concerned, to being overweight, but I would never treat my cholesterol. I treat the 5 things that is plaguing all of us. This is 93% of the population has one of these problems, has metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome should be called what it is, insulin resistant syndrome. It should be called hyperinsulinemia syndrome. Remember I told you 93% of the population has an elevated insulin level and no one's measuring. So insulin level is elevated, but there's other factors. Hypertension is one of them. So high blood pressure, high glucose, right? Diabetes. Not everyone gets it, right? Then you have expanded waistline around the belly section, 40 inches around the waist for men and 35 for women. Okay. A lot of us would qualify for that. It's fat in the wrong place. It's dangerous fat. That's visceral fat. You can have fat in other places of your body, but boobs won't do a damn thing. Subcutaneous fat is inert, doesn't do a thing. You may not like it, but it's not doing any harm. The fat here, harmful, dangerous. And this waist circumference correlates very well with cardiovascular disease, right? So those three factors plus two more lab findings, triglycerides and HDL. I didn't mention cholesterol for a reason. It's not part of it. Okay. So I mentioned basically obesity. Obesity is a symptom of insulin resistance. So if you have an expanded waistline, you have an elevated insulin level. You have an elevated insulin resistance. We need to measure this. Insulin is the common thread. Instead, we're focused on a statin because your LDL is elevated. You know how you lower triglycerides and raise HDL? You go on a very low carbohydrate diet. Now, triglycerides is fat in your, essentially, it's in an LDL particle, but it's excess fat. Triglycerides will go up when you don't burn fat. Triglycerides are fat, and they go up when you don't burn them. So what we find, and this is just an easy rule, I'll just tell you right now. If you're on a ketogenic diet, your triglycerides are going to drop in half. So 250, I expect 125. Next time you test, 12-hour fast, your HDL can come up, and it will come up. It can come up by, in the Verta Health study, they did a low carbohydrate diet. Triglycerides dropped by 50%, and HDL came up by about 25%. I don't have a drug that does that. There is nothing potent that will lower your triglycerides and raise your HDL. Those are two really good factors going in the right direction. If that is improving and you can measure inflammation, as in your highest sensitivity C-reactive protein, that is a measure or a marker of inflammation. Now, just think about that. If I had your marker of inflammation and you're fasting insulin, or the fact that you had low triglycerides and high HDL and low inflammation, I'd say, you know what? You are not at risk for cardiovascular disease. The number one silent killer, take a break. It's not your problem. My triglycerides are 59, and I'm saying less than 80 is good. It's ideal. Insulin should be between 2 and 6. I'm under 2. My HDL is 65. HDL should be high. And if there's any practitioners, they would know that in their patients, triglycerides are always above 125. And for men, their HDL is less than 40. And for women, especially if they're after menopause, postmenopausal, their HDL would be less than 50. These numbers improve on a ketogenic diet. These are very important markers when it comes to cardiovascular disease. What kills us, if we can lower inflammation, we can lower triglycerides and we can raise HDL and we can lower, people always lose many inches in the waist when they do a ketogenic diet. Oh my gosh. And I pretty much go, if you lost 40 pounds, you lost 4 inches in the waist. Fantastic. So they're losing it across. Blood pressure improves. Blood pressure drops more than some sort of DASH diet, which is what they recommend, a colorful diet full of vegetables, whatever. They'll even recommend a low salt diet, low sodium diet. And I'm here to tell you that the recommendations of having sodium intake less than 2 will kill you. It literally will increase your risk of death. Go ahead, follow those guidelines. Follow the AHA. Follow the American Heart Association guidelines that want you on statins. Okay, wants that LDL as low as possible if you have risk factors. No mention of triglycerides, no mention of HDL. They just say follow a balanced diet. Think about the A recommends a diet that will keep you diabetic. They can't even recommend a ketogenic low carb diet. Matter of fact, when I was working in the hospital, I couldn't preach anything other than their current dietary guidelines or I'll be terminated. I had to do it. Many patients got the rant from Kyle. I don't care what they're going to tell you, but you're diabetic and the ketogenic diet has been proven to work. Matter of fact, in Australia, if you're diabetic, they have to offer you a ketogenic low carbohydrate solution as their treatment. I'll tell you right now, if you do a low carb, ketogenic diet in patients who have an infection and they happen to be diabetic, the infection rate goes down. I've even seen somebody lose a toe, type 1, young guy. He had the continuous glucose monitor on. Next time I saw him, he goes, yeah, I got that toe amputated. I couldn't do much about that. But even while I was going through this infection and people's blood, it's very stressful. Their blood sugar skyrockets when they have an infection. Oh my gosh, COVID, you can see it. Their continuous glucose monitor goes nuts. It will jack up 100 when you have an infection. And despite him actually having an infection, he was able to get his blood sugar under control. As a type 1, if you are a type 1, your goal is to lower your insulin dose as much as possible. Insulin is a very toxic hormone. It is what drives fatness. Insulin is what's making us all fat. Everybody has a level of insulin resistance. Everybody has a number. Kids have a number. We all have a number. Imagine having a number, putting it in your phone, and scanning a barcode. Now I can see what your blood sugar is without you eating that food. Don't you think that would be informative? Don't you think that knowing what the foods are doing to you or could be doing to you is informative? I think it's incredibly useful. This is the data. This is the technology we're just not dipping into. The ADA was all about helping us. They would be like sensors on every arm, please. Okay. They're more worried about us overreacting. Chill. Yeah, there will be listen, people get really freaked out when they see they start fasting and they start lowering their blood sugar. Like these women, their blood sugar's in the 50s. Mine's in 40s and 50s in the evening time. My blood sugar gets quite low. Now, technically, if your blood sugar is 60, they would treat you. It needs to be 60. Your blood sugar is quite low at 60. Like typically 70 and lower is quite low. I would feel dizzy and feel like I had low blood sugar when I was significantly heavier. Before I lost my 50 pounds, I would start getting shaky at 85. I'd feel horrible. But when I became fat adapted, 40s doesn't wake me up. 50s doesn't wake me up. I could be 50s during the middle of the day and I don't feel a thing. People are freaking out because their blood sugars. Kyle, do I need to eat before I go to bed? No, you're fine. The brain adapts. And there was a study that showed that when you are fed, the brain is going to require a lot of glucose because you're eating. And when you're eating, insulin levels are going to rise. You're making that brain carb dependent. You don't want your brain to be carb dependent. So when you're in that mode, you're burning 80% of your fuel for the brain as carbohydrates, as glucose, and only 25% is fat. But what's amazing, and this is only really recent. That's a lie. This isn't recent. This is the work of Robert Cahill. He did starvation studies. And in those starvation studies, he showed that the brain could burn 80% of its energy in the form of ketones, beta hydroxybutyrate, BHB. The brain could run 80% of its energy as beta hydroxybutyrate and only 20% of its energy as glucose. But it's not dietary glucose. You can make glucose from other substrates like lactate, lactic acid. Are you familiar? Lactate can be converted to glucose. A triglyceride, it has a glycerol backbone with these long chain fatty acids hanging onto it. This is glycerol. I can use that. I can make glucose. The body can make glucose. It doesn't have to eat it. Because if you think about how nonsensical this really truly is, to tell you that you got to eat 70 grams of carbohydrates in 3 separate meals, 200 grams of carbs. This is what we tell diabetics. You got a glucose problem. Why are you putting more glucose into the problem, right? It makes absolutely no sense. But to tell people that we were dependent upon carbohydrates for brain food, we would have died forever ago. How could you and me go get something if we haven't eaten in 3 or 4 days? We are in ketosis after a day. We are in deep ketosis. What is the brain burning if you and I haven't eaten in 3 days and we got to go find food? The brain's running on ketones and you're probably not burning much glucose at all. you're conserving it or you're recycling it very well, right? This kind of smashes the whole idea that you've got to eat carbohydrates. And if you start thinking about carbohydrates, all carbohydrates come from plants. How in the world would a Homo sapien, this apex predator, ever become who we are if we were dependent upon plants? We would have to all live near the equator. We didn't. We traveled further north we gambled on that because we said that fat from that animal, especially an herbivore, I could live off of. Matter of fact, I'm saying that the currency of the world 10,000 years ago would have been some fat pack that we would have carried around. I would have traded you fat, and I probably wouldn't have traded it for oranges or some nuts or seeds or something. Like, okay, I want like kind. Like I want something that's going to keep me warm or something. But I'm saying that we were designed to burn fat. And
So, what is your
I think
take on the rise of plant-based as the new health gold standard?
won't work. It can't work. I
Why
don't know
are
how you're going to
people
do this
advocating
thing.
for plant-based right now?
Yeah, this is will get me off of gets you off of YouTube. Yes, vegans and vegetarians. That is a tough one because they usually like I've seen iron deficiencies, B12 deficiencies, lots of anemia. If you think about plants, they never give it to you in the active form. You need D3. It's going to give you D1 or D2. You need K2. It gives you K1. It's always deficient. It's not in the right active form, number one. It doesn't have the bioavailability of animal source foods. The absorption of plant-based protein is like 15%. Eggs, animal based, 45, 35%, double that of plant. The problem is you're going to have to be really good at combining various foods in various forms throughout the day. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm saying it's very difficult. And I think people will more likely run into problems about, and I feel like I feel like it's more of an ethical thing than it is biological. The absorption is what it is. It's just how we were designed. If you look at our small intestine, which is where fat and protein are absorbed, it's massive. It's the size of a tennis court. The colon has gotten smaller and smaller. It's closer to that of a carnivore, like that of a dog. Okay. That's where plant material is digested, is in your colon. And our colon has gotten shorter. If we were supposed to be digesting a lot of plants, our colons would be bigger. We'd have bigger bellies. We'd have more like an orangutan's belly. It would be much larger so we can ferment the food and absorb. We're not herbivores. The pH of our stomach is that of a hyena, a carnivore. How are we going to feed all these dogs and cats that are carnivores? This is just biology. It is what it is. My thought about this is just be grateful. Be grateful that we have a source of food that has all the essential amino acids, all the essential fats, and all the essential minerals and vitamins. You get that in an egg. Those are multivites. And I keep scratching my head about the egg. Why is it that the egg has everything that we need? And I think about when it comes to capturing animals, this is an egg. It's so easy. It's simple. It's high energy food that just happens to have all the essential vitamins, minerals, amino acids, fats, choline. What happens if you don't have enough acetylcholine to make neurotransmitters? What happens if you don't have enough cholesterol in your diet? Your body has to make it. Your body can't depend upon your dietary sources to make that cholesterol. And phytosterols is not a good substitute, which comes from plants. Phytosterols will make red blood cells stiff. You need cholesterol. And the best kind of cholesterol is that what comes from animals. It's already made. We don't have to spend a ton of energy creating this. Cholesterol allows receptors. It makes a cell rigid. So a receptor, say an insulin receptor, needs to stand completely straight, and it needs cholesterol to help with that rigidity. If you don't have enough cholesterol in these membranes of your cells, that receptor is going to lay flat. This is basically, I just explained to you like how statins cause type 2 diabetes in women. We need the cholesterol, and we need the cholesterol more so as we get older to protect our brains. The myelin sheath in which the neurons are wrapped around is cholesterol. The cell membranes of a red blood cell is cholesterol. It allows the cell to change shape. It allows red blood cells to get to tiny little spaces and then pop out on the other side in perfect shape. That's cholesterol doing its job. Phytosterols? No. Phytosterols will crystallize. We find this. So we see red blood cells, we see these phytosterol crystals, we see organisms from our mouth in these atherosclerotic plaques, and we find small, dense LDL particles, a very unusual particle, a very tiny particle. We don't just have one LDL particle. This is going into the weeds on LDL, but I think it's really important. When somebody says that I have a cholesterol, an LDL level of, or a cholesterol level of 150, what does that mean? Okay. How many LDL particles do you have? Do you have a bunch of big fluffy ones? Or do you have a bunch of small, dense little ones? The big fluffy ones can be recycled by your liver. These are the ones we want. They're big, they're fluffy, they're wonderful. I have these. When your triglycerides are and your HDL, when your triglycerides and your HDL are very close to the same number, when you take your triglycerides and you divide it by the HDL, that number should be less than 2 for most people. If people do some simple math here, just whip out your lipid panel. Real simple. There's 3 numbers there. There's a triglyceride, there's an LDL, and there's an HDL. Ignore the LDL for now. Let's look at that triglyceride and HDL. If that number is less than 2, okay, I would say your LDL are big and fluffy. If the number is greater than 2, you have small, dense LDL. And the small, dense LDL aren't big and fluffy like beach balls. They're like bullets. They're like golf balls. When they hit another cell, there's some exchange. Okay. It's got to smack it. Right. And we think that it might be the reason why we see these LDL particles everywhere. They're very tiny. They can fit in every tiny little spaces. It has to be removed by your kidneys. It takes a lot longer to get rid of this. It sticks around for closer to a week versus 1 to 2 days. So this is like sand that goes everywhere. And yes, this is what we see in the plaque, but it has to be oxidized and glycated. The glycation's easy because you got sticky glucose all over the place. So it sticks to everything. But imagine having this particle that's like sand. It's everywhere. And you stress, right? Everybody has a certain amount of oxidative stress. This oxidation or peroxidation of, unfortunately, seed oils. So they're carrying this. Oxygen's toxic. Oxygen needs to be dealt with by the cells rapidly. But that's not what's going on. We're not able to antioxidize, or the antioxidants in our life need to do a better job, but we're stressing it out so it's tired. There's too much antioxidants needed because you have oxidative stress essentially everywhere. Oxidative damage everywhere. You got these oxidative free radicals spinning around your body like crazy. So no wonder you have a small, dense LDL particle that's oxidized. But when it gets oxidized, it sends a trigger. And the trigger is for white blood cells to move into the area. When you have white blood cells moving into a plaque area where there's a whole bunch of oxidized small, dense LDL particles, you now create the plaque that now has foam cells. These white blood cells go in there and then they die. This is how a plaque grows. This is what we're doing. This is okay. This is theory. This is philosophy. This is based on lots of years of studying, but lots of years of listening to physicians and instructors like Ben Bickman, David Diamond, David Feldman. There's a new study out with lean mass hyperresponders, but I think we're really just starting to understand cholesterol, its role and its importance in everything when it comes to not just cardiovascular disease, but how important basically is your ability to grow muscle is dependent upon how much cholesterol you have as well. So when we lower cholesterol, and I'm sure there's plenty of people on statins listening to this, you can't make bigger muscle membranes because you need cholesterol to build a membrane. So what is one of the common effects of statins? It's muscle aches. So here I have these people coming to the window and I'm asking them, do you got muscle aches? Yeah, it's probably your statin doing that to you. And they'll say something like, I had this brain fog and I can't stand it. So that's because the myelin sheath that's got cholesterol surrounding it. This makes a really good, like a resistant wire right? Like the coating on a wire that helps with resistance. That's cholesterol creates that coating on the wire. So when that coating is basically not there because we've lowered your cholesterol, people start getting this brain fog, brain energy problem, as well as your neurons aren't firing properly. So here these people have this brain fog and it's induced by a low cholesterol problem that's caused by a statin. And they will tell you when they did the original studies that it's not that common. It's really common. I've seen it in about a third of patients. They have this brain fog and these muscle aches that is really caused by the statin drug itself. And women, there's no reason why a woman should be on this. There's no data. We don't do studies on healthy women. We do studies on healthy males, right? And what's good for men must be good for women. That's literally how much thought went into this. And they've lowered the goalpost so that more people are now required to be on a statin. There's no new data. There's no groundbreaking anything. And the original safety data, it's under lock and key. Pharmaceutical companies paid for it. You can't access it. They're hiding something. That's what I'm saying. The
Wow.
side effects of the statins are real. And it's when you think about how much is focused around this cholesterol thing and this anti-animal meat and what that has really done to us. Because you've been demonizing animal fat and animal protein sources, and instead you're doing plants, look what's happened to us. 60 to 70% of our diet is carbohydrates and is refined food. It's like they think that the WHO thinks that 90% of our food can come from ultra processed foods. But we're just going to be short in vitamin A. No, wait, the vitamin D, vitamin E, and then choline, all of which you get from freaking eggs. Why can't you just say it? Why can't you just say that this is superior source food? Animals are superior to plant-based foods. You don't want to say it because you're going to piss off too many people. Too much industry. Everything's going to change. The food pyramid will flip upside down. Everyone's going to be all disgusted with how we're eating animals now. So it's going to be a gradual change. It has to be a gradual change. So I tell my patients, quickest to carnivore wins, right? How do you want to get there is up to you. But there's going to be a lot less plants and there's going to be a lot more animal source meat. If you want to be properly fueled and have adequate amounts of protein, if you want to become like you did, bodybuilder, yes, you're going to have to eat a lot more animal source. You don't have the room for the plants. Because what are plants? What is glucose? It is just flipping energy. Glucose, carbohydrates, it's just energy. It's not structure. It's not function. It's not necessary for some sort of enzyme. Like it is not essential for man's existence. Carbohydrates. And you're probably we're trying to push it. And I think we're going to have tons of problems. I see it. We're going to have problems in Europe. We're going to have all kinds of deficiencies. Not good for us. We're going to see anemia. Like you can always tell. Oftentimes it's the color of their skin. I don't know what you're feeling or what you're eating, but when I see someone that doesn't have good skin tone, good skin color, I think that's either a perfusion problem or you're anemic. Something's not right. And you can't tell by looking at people. When people say, "Oh, I'm fine, I'm fine." We have plenty of healthy looking sick people. Skinny sick is on the rise. We're not measuring. We're not getting the right test done. And that's really bothersome and really troublesome to me.
I love it. The work you're doing, Kyle, is insane. This is the end of part one of talking to Kyle because he is such an expert. We have so much to talk about. Yeah, Kyle, thank you for being on the show. And we're going to be shooting
Oh
part
my
two very
gosh.
soon. So I can't wait to bring you on and explore so many other topics that people really need to know about.
Yeah. No, I love doing this. This is fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle.